All right, welcome again to Sensory Processing and ADHD webinar. So you might be joining us as a parent, as a caregiver. Maybe you're a mom or dad and you see your kiddo struggling in school, especially when school gets partway through the year and you start to get some parent-teacher conference feedback and realize your kiddo isn't doing as well as you hope they do this year. Or you might be joining as a teacher yourself or a social worker, a mental health professional, and you're just looking for resources to help your kiddo. I know when we had people register for this webinar, we had some from San Juan, from Calgary, from locally here in the Twin Cities in Minnesota. So wherever you're coming from, welcome. We're happy to have you. And this is a webinar that I get very excited to share because a lot of times I see parents really struggling with two different things. One, they're struggling to understand their kiddo because maybe your kiddo has ADHD and you're wondering, is it a chemical imbalance? Do I need to medicate them? Or is like just new foods the answer? Or maybe it's something going on in their body. Or is it their brain waves? Do I need some sort of neurofeedback mechanism to help them out? Or maybe your kiddo has sensory issues and you're also having trouble understanding them because you realize sometimes they do perfectly fine and sometimes they just get overwhelmed. They have a meltdown, they have a tantrum, they become defiant, stubborn, unwilling to try something new, and I don't know what kind of day it's going to be with them. So, number one, you might have trouble understanding your kiddo, and because there is so much different information out there to even what's going on, number two, you might have trouble knowing what to do to help. So, in this webinar, I want to first start by acknowledging you might feel confused right now. You might have tried a lot already, and odds are if you've tried something and it's not working, that's why you're watching this webinar. You might have been just in the research phase and you're scrolling through Google and reading articles and you're trying to gather data because you know your kiddo's struggling and you know they're not doing as well as you think they could be doing, but you're not quite sure the next steps. So in this webinar, I want to share with you what we see as different patterns in our office to help you better know what's going on inside your kiddo's brain and more clearly understand what a good next step would be. Just this last summer, I had a kiddo start who in last year was 6th grade for him, and mom and dad said he was doing okay until about halfway through the year, and they started doing a lot of projects. And what they found is that his brain couldn't stay focused long enough to keep up with the projects. So what they started to see then is now his self-esteem started to suffer because he's a bright kid and he was trying so hard, but his brain was distracted. He was more on the side of ADHD, and his brain couldn't focus long enough to connect step one to step two to step three to complete the project. And he knew he was a smart kid, but now he could also start to see that other kids were getting through things quicker and more easily than he was, and parents could see it was taking a toll on him. Fortunately, they started working with us this summer, and fast forward, now we're in October of the new school year, and they just did parent-teacher conferences, and they were saying, yep, he's much more focused, he's much more regulated, he is able to get through things a lot easier. And so it's fun to see now his shine and his self-esteem start to come to the surface because he knows he can get things done and stay with it long enough to accomplish things. And the cool thing is, whether your kiddo is dealing with some sensory issues or ADHD, one thing we know is that their brain is amazing. In this formerly a 6th grader case, when he came in this summer, I was able to look him in the eyes and say, hey buddy, guess what? I know it feels overwhelming right now, but I bet your brain processes the world way quicker than anyone else. Your brain is actually a superpower. And he looks at me, he's like, Dr. Ty, guess what? It is. When I sat down in this room, in like 6 seconds, I had figured out what that thing was going to be for and what that table was over there and that thing over there. And I knew that his brain processed the world quickly. So what we wanted to do is not look at that as a disability or something that was wrong with him, but we wanted him to be able to harness that superpower of a quick processing brain and actually use it to be more effective in the world. So that's what I'm excited to share with you today. And I will cover a little bit right away of what ADHD and sensory, why we a lot of times see overlap, because you might be watching this video for yourself or your kiddo, and you might have one of them diagnosed, or you might think, yeah, I think it's this sensory processing issue or an ADHD issue. And a lot of times what we see in our office is there's a lot of overlap between the two. One might be leading to another. And so that's what we want to deep dive here today, because as a parent, again, it might be confusing, and I want to help you simplify. So in order to do that, there's going to be three main things that we cover today. We're going to talk a lot about what does it take for your kiddo's brain to feel safe, and why that ties into sensory issues or distraction issues or hyper not able to focus issues. We're going to talk about what might be causing this. Is there calm going into the brain or stress going into the brain? And then lastly, as the theme mentions, how to help. And the focus here, we're going to talk a lot about the gas pedal versus brake pedal, and how to slow the gas, take your foot off the gas, apply the brake to allow your kiddo's brain ultimately to be more calm and more organized. So I want to start with how the brain works, and we're going to talk about what is going into the brain yields what comes out of the brain. So when we look at a kiddo that's struggling, a lot of times parents come to see us because of what they're noticing on this side of things. They're looking at the output because that is where all the symptoms show up. If the brain's feeling stressed or overwhelmed, what we might see here is a kiddo that is afraid or nervous. They don't want to go to a birthday party, or they're afraid of a new situation. Maybe a kiddo that's really hyper, or they get distracted easy. Kiddo, we had a 6-year-old girl that started this week or last week that was doing okay in school, but mom said when they get home, they notice big meltdowns, big tantrums, very stubborn, very defiant, very controlling at home. So those are all examples of symptoms that you might be noticing with your kiddo, because those symptoms are what affect quality of life the most. If your kiddo was feeling safe and happy to go to new environments, if they are feeling calm and focused, if they went with the flow and weren't so controlling, if they cooperated and life was easy, if that was the output, you probably wouldn't be watching this webinar right now. So while this is the symptom, what we find in our office is this is a result. If you find your body's sweating all the time, usually it's because something is telling your body to sweat. Maybe you've got some detoxing to do. Maybe you're 90 degrees in the sun on the beach and it makes sense that you're sweating. But you don't blame sweating for the issue. You want to back it up and say, oh, I'm in a really hot environment. No wonder I'm sweating. So ultimately, these symptoms are clues to what's going on, but they're not actually the problem. So if we back things up, the reason those things are happening is because your kiddo's brain is actually telling those things to happen. The brain has two main modes. It has a gas pedal mode, a fight-flight mode, and it has a calm mode, the brake pedal mode. So gas pedal mode is also known as the parasympathetic response. So if we go into gas pedal mode, that's like gas pedal, gas pedal, gas pedal. It gets the heart going, it gets the blood flowing to the extremities where the muscles are, and it's for taking action. So gas pedal mode is one of the common things we see that creates anxieties, creates worries, creates hyperness, creates distraction, and creates a lot of the symptoms you might be noticing with your kiddo. On the flip side, brake pedal mode is what slows things down. It allows the brain to be calm, focused, and organized. It allows your kiddo to fall asleep easily at night. As some of the other things that can happen with your kiddo if they're stuck in gas pedal mode, you might notice they get sick more often. They have a lot of allergies or congestion. Maybe they had a lot of ear infections as a kid, or sinus infections, colds that last for weeks on end. Those are indicators that their gas pedal's in overdrive and their immune system is starting to become weaker. Another thing we see with a lot of kiddos, if they're stuck in gas pedal mode all the time, is their digestion might be thrown off. They're constipated, and maybe foods bother their stomach easily. So some of these things are indicators that the brake pedal isn't as active as we want it to be. And we start to see this imbalance happening. Too much gas, not enough brake. So if the brain's under gas pedal mode, it's going to tell the body to respond in gas pedal ways. Now, if we back that up one more section here, the brain doesn't just randomly tell the body what to do. If you know someone with high blood pressure, let's say, high blood pressure is a result of the brain feeling oftentimes that extra stress, and it's telling blood pressure to be high. Blood pressure itself isn't the problem. So if we go back to why would the brain tell the blood pressure to be high, it's because of what environment is happening. Maybe it's a stressful external environment. Maybe it's someone with a lot of work deadlines, or maybe there's an internal stress and there's something inside their body telling their brain to feel stressed and amplify blood pressure to, again, detoxification could be a common example. But ultimately, we're looking at what's going into the brain. So if we now look at things from a sensory perspective and ADHD perspective, what are some of the things that might be going into the brain that cause this stressful output? Before I go into examples here, I want to share a story of a kiddo that was diagnosed with ADHD when he came to see us in 5th grade. But upon a little further investigation, we actually found it was more of a sensory issue leading to his brain feeling distracted. So this will help you link these things together. So when he came to see us in 5th grade, Mom said he was diagnosed with ADHD and had a really tough time focusing. He was having a lot of trouble with math and reading, and I started asking him more questions. I said, all right, buddy, when do you feel most distracted? And he said, I feel most distracted if we break out into little groups, because if I hear other kids talking, I want to always be listening. What's going on over there? What are they saying? And I can't focus on the group that I'm in because my brain's thinking about the other groups. Or if I'm sitting in class and I hear another kid tapping his pencil, or I hear the radiator or the heater, the air ducts kick on, I immediately need to look and see what's going on with what I just heard. So I thought, what it sounds like is when you hear something, it's coming into your brain too noisy. As a result, your brain can't filter it out and your brain has to focus on something different. So you're getting distracted because these sounds coming into your brain are coming in too loudly. So in the sensory world, what we found is his brain wasn't doing a good job doing sensory processing when it came to the auditory sense or the listening sense. What Mom also noticed before we started care is that when he traveled, and he traveled a lot because he was on a traveling soccer team, so most weekends he was in a different city going somewhere else to travel, he would get nervous and anxious and he would throw up because his brain was getting overwhelmed by all the new input and couldn't handle it well. So fast forward a couple months, we started adjusting him, and I'm checking in with Mom and say, all right, how's school going? When she filled out her early progress exam in those couple months, she said, guess what? He's got a newfound love for reading. He's just got 100% an A plus on his math test. And I asked, all right, awesome. He's doing better in school. How is traveling going? She said, come to think of it, the last few times we had traveling soccer, when we were away, he didn't throw up. He was handling the world better. So focusing better in school, not throwing up, not as anxious, this symptom side was better because we were able to help his brain handle the environment better. A week later, he comes in and he gives me a high five and he goes, Dr. Ty, guess what? I just got moved up in math class. I got moved up to the next level. And what we found then is, taking a step back, is yes, he was diagnosed with ADHD of his brain, but what the real issue was is he couldn't handle sensory processing well. So once we helped his brain process that auditory, that hearing better, we found his brain was able to focus better and succeed. So the brain, from a sensory standpoint, spends a lot of energy actually filtering things out of our environment. If you go to a party and there's a dozen conversations happening, you're able to focus on the person across from you because your brain actually spends energy filtering out all the other conversations. and allowing you to interact with that person. If your brain doesn't do a good job of doing that, and now all of a sudden all dozen conversations are coming into your brain, of course you're going to feel distracted, disorganized, and it probably is going to lead you to feel a little more stressed in that environment. Because socially, you're supposed to be connecting with this person. Socially the right thing to do is to be able to respond and participate in this conversation. But if you're so distracted because all these other conversations are coming in, you're going to feel a little uncomfortable in your body. You're going to feel like, man, I feel embarrassed not being able to talk to this person. Your brain is going to start to feel more overwhelmed and worried because all this info is going in. It'd be like if you went to a big concert with lots of noise, but all of a sudden 3 bands were playing at once and your brain's getting bombarded with all this information. Of course, it's going to make you feel uncomfortable. So if this is happening with your kiddo, they might feel uncomfortable going to a new environment because they don't know what's going to be happening. They might not want to go to a birthday party because they know they're going to get overwhelmed with all this extra information coming in. So when we start to understand why things are happening, we can also start to empathize. If your kiddo doesn't like birthday parties because their brain gets overwhelmed, they might withdraw. They might feel anxious, nervous. They might say, nope, I'm not going to do that. They might become very controlling or stubborn or defiant, and they just put their foot down. They're like, I am not going in there. And instead of thinking of them as misbehaving, or instead of thinking them as they're just stubborn and strong-willed and I can never do anything with them, take the step back and realize, they must be doing that to protect themselves because their brain doesn't feel safe. When we can start to understand and empathize with our kiddos, now we can start to relate to them better and help them out. So that's an example simply of auditory. Visual processing is another sensory thing that we see commonly that might also lead into ADHD, because same as auditory, your brain has to spend energy if the teacher's talking and writing on the board in front of the class, and visually you have to see that. If your brain is distracted visually, you might see another kid move or wiggle in his chair. You might see someone mowing the lawn outside the classroom and you have to go look and you get easily distracted. Going to a birthday party, there's going to be a lot of movement. There might be lots of games happening, kids running around everywhere. That visual input can also be too much environmentally that overwhelms and distracts the brain. So vision is another sense that can lead to sensory processing issues or ADHD. Some of the other senses, smell, taste, are things that can be common but not as common. In those cases, you might have a kiddo that's a really picky eater, or the 6-year-old girl that I mentioned earlier. Mom's like, yep, she always has to smell her food before she eats it, and it might be more easily say, nope, I don't like that. They might want only certain textures. They might just like mashed potatoes and cooked carrots, or something that's very soft and easy, or maybe they like really crunchy things. And sometimes the confusion with sensory processing is there might be one extreme or another. The reason being, sometimes senses are coming in too noisy, which is a lot of what we've talked about here, or sometimes they're actually coming in too quiet. So we'll discuss that a little bit as well. When it comes to too quiet, there's things that then you might see a kiddo seeking things out. They might run into the wall or give you like really big hugs. There's a 3rd grader, actually this 5th grader's brother that I mentioned with the hearing sensory issue leading to ADHD, his younger brother. Mom and dad said he always gave too tight of hugs. He like didn't realize his strength. It always felt like he was strangling you. In that case, his brain was actually seeking more of a sensory input from the environment that was coming from his body. So I'm going to finish up here. One more input from more of the external environment, then I want to come back to that one because I want to wrap things up in the 5 senses that we commonly see. When we go through schooling, we talk about the 5 senses. We mentioned hearing, we mentioned vision, we mentioned smell, we mentioned taste. The last one is touch. So touch comes from things touching our skin, feeling our body. In this case, touch can be more overwhelming for your kiddo if you notice they don't like things like their feet with their grass, with barefoot in the grass, or sand on their toes, or they get their hands dirty and they want to wash it right away. Sometimes the touch sense is overwhelming if your kiddo hates tags or needs the seams on their socks lined up perfectly. Maybe they like things loose fitting instead of tight collars or waistbands. Those would be examples there. We had a girl that was, I want to say 9 years old, and mom said, yeah, whenever I'd like put my hand on her shoulder, she'd be like, don't touch me. Why are you touching me? And as a result, she didn't like being hugged very much. We started working with her, and I remember the first time she was in the office when I'd be adjusting her brothers, I look over, mom and her might be sitting on chairs, always separate from each other. And they were a loving, affectionate family, but she just didn't want any part of it. We were adjusting her for several months, and fast forward, her dad got a job over in Europe, and they were going to move. And right before they moved to Europe, I remember looking one day over at them, and daughter is sitting in mom's lap. Mom's holding her, hugging her, and petting her hair. And mom's looking just happy and content as can be because she's able to snuggle her daughter and love her daughter. And we were touching base before they left, and she goes, thank you, Dr. Ty, because of your office, now I can give my daughter a hug. She actually enjoys being touched and snuggled and loved up by me. And it feels so heartwarming to provide those changes. And that was an example where touch, that fifth sense, was coming in too noisy and too distracted into her daughter's brain. As a result, she wanted to be away from that touch all the time. The 6-year-old that I mentioned that just started, mom said, yeah, sometimes it takes 10 or 15 minutes to put her socks on to get the seams lined up just right. So that'd be an example of your kiddo. They're not trying to take an hour to get dressed in the morning because they're a bad kid. They're not trying to make you mad and piss you off because they're like, nope, try again, mom. Take my socks on and off as many times as you want. It's got to be perfect. They're not trying to do it to be controlling. They're doing it because it's stressful for their brain. So that last sense of touch is of the 5 senses that we commonly learn in school. The last 2 that I want to touch on today from a sensory standpoint that can have key indicators not only for sensory processing but for ADHD are senses coming from the body. So going back what I was just talking to before of the 3rd grader that was hugging too tight, he was seeking a sense from the body called proprioception. Proprioception, if your kiddo has gone to OT, you've probably heard of this sense before. It comes from all the little joints and the little muscles in the body. And what it does is it lets the brain, know where the body's at in space. If we didn't have proprioception, if we were walking along and stepped off a curb, we would just fall over. If we didn't have proprioception, we didn't know where our body's at in space. Because of that sense, I can shut my eyes and still find where my nose is because my brain knows where my body's at. The thing with this proprioception is it's incredibly calming for the brain. That's why if a kiddo isn't getting it, they are going to seek it. And that's why sometimes sensory processing can be confusing because you might say, yeah, my kiddo doesn't like loud noises or bright lights or a little spider crawling on their arm. It drives them absolutely nuts. Those things are coming in too noisy. And at the same time, they need these really big hugs, or they love a weighted blanket. They love me to wrestle and roll and tumble on the ground with them. They love for me to squish them. They need lots of that input. That's because proprioception is likely missing from their brain. So one sense might be coming in too noisy. This proprioception sense might be coming in too quiet. So if you find your kiddo loving lots of deep pressure, it's because it's very calming for their brain. And that's an example then where when we can put calm input in, they start to be more regulated in their body as an output. The second sense, so proprioception was, I won't do that one, I won't flick you guys off. But the second sense that's coming from inside the body is a vestibular sense. This sense comes from the inner ear, and it is allows us to process if we're moving or if we're still. So as a kid, you might have loved swinging on the swing set, going on the merry-go-round, rolling, doing somersaults, rolling down the hill. All those things put vestibular input into the brain. And as your kiddo's brain is growing and developing, it's one of the key senses. I remember when my son was about 2 years old, there'd be stretches where he'd just want to go on the swing over and over and over again. Or there's this little kind of seat at the playground where you could hop on it and it was off tilt a little bit, so once you get spinning you could just go and go and go. And as an adult, I would get dizzy really quickly, but he would just go and go and go because his brain was in the process of learning and incorporating that vestibular sense. So he wanted lots of motion to bring it into his brain, so then in the future when he hasn't been on it yet, but he has at the Minnesota State Fair. He's been on a smaller roller coaster, is what I was thinking of here. But a roller coaster, you do twist turns up and downs. If you hate those, if you throw up from them, odds are there's a vestibular issue that your brain can't handle it. Someone who gets car sick really easy would be an example again of a vestibular issue, that they're just not able to handle it well. When my son was only 8 months old, we brought him to this big toy place a couple hours south of the Twin Cities, and they had a little merry-go-round, actually a big merry-go-round, but a little play area, and we hop on it and like, oh, this will be fun. And we hop on about 15 seconds in, merry-go-round is going up and down and around in a circle. You see his fingers grip tight, and you see his face just go like kind of this car sick feeling. And we're like, oh shoot, sorry bud, that was a little bit early. Your vestibular system wasn't developed enough to handle all that input. Well, let's go back to rolling on the ground and learning to lift and turn your head. Those are some of the early signs of that input. So ultimately, if that's off, it can also stress the brain out. So bringing things back here a moment, what happens is your brain is taking all this information in from the environment. We have the 5 external senses, the 2 internal senses. It's gathering all that data and it's deciding, am I safe or am I not? If your brain feels safety, it checks the box and it moves a step ahead to interacting with the world, to feeling present and aware in the world, to be able to expand into the world and engage with it. If your brain doesn't check the box of safety, if one of those things in the environment is cueing danger, now your brain instead goes into the fight-flight mode, the sympathetic response. And if it goes into fight-flight mode, now you start to see those symptoms of gas pedal that I explained earlier. You start to see the worries and the concerns, the distraction, the hyperness, the irritability, the tantrums, the meltdowns, the running all over the place because something in the brain doesn't feel content and peaceful. So step 1, whenever we're working with a family, is make sure that we can get good input in a way that the brain can process it and feel safe. And so one of the keys here is that you might have 2 kiddos in the exact same environment. And one kiddo does perfectly fine, and the other kiddo is the one that the gas pedal gets cranked up and is going crazy. So here's the thing. In that case, it wasn't necessarily the environment that's the issue. It's how their brain was processing the environment. And that's why sensory processing is such a foundational piece in helping your child, is because it allows 2 kiddos in the same environment to start to handle that environment better and better. If it were the environment, let's say a tiger jumps into the classroom, now it makes sense that the entire classroom and the teacher all go into a high alert. It makes sense then that everyone cranks their foot on the gas because guess what? A danger just appeared that we all should respond to appropriately as danger. And again, this is why sensory processing can be a little bit confusing or distracting. You say, like, yeah, but that kid does fine. Why is my kid struggling? It's not because the environment is the issue, it's because of how their brain is handling the environment. What we start to look for then in our office is, how can we help your kiddo's brain start to get more calm going into it? So when we assess, we look at, all right, there's those 5 external senses. And by the time you come in to see us in our office, odds are you've probably started to identify what some of the big triggers are. You know what's causing your kiddo to struggle. You're like, yep, they don't like birthday parties and they don't like the movies. Those noises and those sounds are too distracting. Or, yep, we know that we got to cut off the tags to his clothes as soon as we get him. And what can be overwhelming then is you're working so hard to manage the external environment that it becomes exhausting for you as a parent. And you're looking to say, well, what can we do to help them process that environment better? So what we look for in our office then is, what's happening internally? What if one of those internal stresses is sending stress into the brain that is causing it to be overwhelmed? If I'm going to put this up here. Let's pretend this is a little cup and it represents how much stress your kiddo's brain can handle before things spill over. If your kiddo has a lot going on and isn't handling the external environment well, they're going to start to feel stressed and stressed and stressed and stressed. And their baseline stress might be really high. What happens then is a little bit of stress fills them to the top and they spill out over the edge, and you start to notice all the trouble, right? Maybe as a parent you say, yeah, my baseline stress, I'm doing okay. A tiger jumps into the room and boom, instantly it rises up and you spill over the edge. Appropriately, your brain should respond that way. So what we find with a kiddo with a lot of sensory issues is the day-to-day sensory input is coming in so noisy to their brain that they have to spend so much energy just getting through the day that maybe by the time they do get home, they're already at their max. So you tell them to take off their shoes and go wash their hands, and it's too much. Boom, spills them over the edge. So what our job is to see internally, is there a lot of stress happening? Because if we can identify that stress and start to lower the internal stress, now their baseline of stress might be nice and low. So they can handle a few directives at home. They can handle doing some chores or turning off their iPad and coming to eat. It's like, I want to keep playing my game, but I guess I'll come to the dinner table. And they get a little stressed and they come down before they spill over the edge. So what we look for in our office are stresses coming from the nervous system internally. Now, one of the ways we measure that are with these neurological scans. So what we find is if there is a lot of stress internally, it's going to show up, instead of white bars, which is what we want to see, it's going to show up as high intensity stress. Green's mild, blue's moderate, red is severe. So this is an example of a 7-year-old girl that came to see us, and when she came to see us, Mom said she wouldn't wear socks. She'd only wear shoes and clothes that were a size or two too big, and she wouldn't put lotion on her hands. So if you know, in Minnesota here in the winters, we get dry, we get cold, and so her hands are kind of crackly and dry. What we found is a huge amount of stress you can see in her upper neck. So even though she was in a loving environment, even though Mom and Dad cared for her and tried their best to help her out, she was feeling very stressed internally, not because of the external environment, but because of all the stress happening inside her body and how well she was able to process the external environment. Fast forward, we started adjusting her. In 3 weeks or so into care, all of a sudden I look down as I'm adjusting her and I'm like, hey, you're wearing socks today. What's up, dear? And she goes, oh yeah, don't worry. I slept with them on last night. No big deal. Okay, cool. Go a little bit further. And Mom said, now, as we're getting dressed in the morning, instead of all this fighting and yelling and taking forever, she's doing it with ease, no problem. She's wearing a lot of clothes that used to feel icky. So with her initial scan, you can see this follow-up was 2 months later. We still have some work to do, but it's a much calmer scan, especially up top here, than what used to be there. So why did this take place? Is a lot had to do. I'm going to talk about two things. We're going to go gas pedal and brake pedal here, but a lot had to do with also what was going into her brain from her body. This proprioception sense that I mentioned before, one of the key internal senses that calms the brain. One of the reasons that weighted blankets can be very calming for a lot of kids. In this girl's case, that sense was way off. Instead of having good alignment and good stress from her spine and her neural spinal system, all the nerves along her spine and her nervous system was sending a tremendous amount of stress into the brain. So what we like to look at is the input coming in through her spinal cord and all the nerves along her spine going into her brain were actually stressing her brain out. So no matter how calm the environment was, she was receiving noise, distraction from her body. I like to call it Metallica going into the brain. And you might be trying to fall asleep at night, but if you crank a bunch of Metallica in your headphones, odds are it's going to keep you up later. So what we did is find that distraction, and by clearing things out, we started to put calm into her brain from her body. And the cool thing with that now is she could be in the exact same environment, but handle it much better because there was calm going into her body. So proprioception is one of the key things we work with to be able to see how can we put good input into the brain. And the lovely thing about that is now you don't have to be constantly on high alert, calming your kid down, preventing from this chaos, because you're able to get that baseline lower. When there's no proprioception going into the brain and there's stress going into the brain, their baseline of stress is going to be really, really high. It's easy to spill over the edge. When we start putting the body's natural proprioception into the brain, which the majority actually comes from all the joints and muscles of the spine because there's so many there, now we start to bring that baseline way lower. It's like your kids, let's say your kid does love a weighted blanket and you do it all the time. It's like they're walking around with that happy weighted blanket without actually needing to wear it. The third grader that I mentioned that gave too tight of hugs, once we started adjusting him, Mom said, guess what? He's given normal size hugs now because his brain wasn't seeking that extra input. She noticed as a result, he was a lot more calm, a lot more regulated, a lot more grounded because his brain was receiving that sensory input naturally. The last piece then we're going to touch on how to help has to do with gas pedal versus brake pedal. So if there's a lot of stress inside the body going into the brain, it's going to activate the gas pedal. That Metallica going into the brain naturally makes the brain want to be active, be hyper, and be distracted, be unfocused. It's going to create all this tension in the body that might yield anxiety, nervousness, worries, right? So if we can activate the brake pedal, that's going to start to put calm into the brain, start to see the brain be a lot more regulated and focused. You might find that your kiddo, if they're constantly stressed and distracted, that they start to get a disorganized brain. And that can be because of constant gas pedal, constant noise into the brain, never lets the brain calm down, consolidate, and feel organized again. So if you see your kiddo getting disorganized and maybe they're struggling with reading or handwriting, maybe they're struggling with like fine motor, gross motor, these might be common additional symptoms that you're noticing with your kiddo, odds are it's because their brain was being distracted for so long that now it's starting to become disorganized. So our goal is to take the foot off the gas, start to apply the brake, and then we start to see more calm and organization happening. How do we do that? Well, if you've looked into things long enough, you've probably heard of one of the major brake pedals in the body called the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve is our good friend here because this is about 75% of the brake pedal for the whole nervous system. And it's critical because we all have stresses. we all have things that rev us up. The brake pedal is needed when we want to calm down from those stresses. So gas pedal should go on if your kiddo's running around outside playing at the playground. Gas pedal should go on for you if you have to get all the kids ready and get out the door in the morning in time for school. You need to be in that go, go, go mode. You need to be in go, go, go mode if you have a project at work, if you're doing a workout. All those things are appropriate to have gas pedal. However, we also need the brake pedal to bring us down from it. Because if we can't activate the brake and bring us down, we lie awake in bed at night with our mind just churning about all the to-dos for the next day. Your kiddo tosses and turns, or they wake up in the middle of the night and they can't get back to sleep. Those are all indicators that the brake pedal isn't active. And if the brake pedal isn't active, when we start going strong, we never come down from it. So by activating the brake pedal, we start to give our kiddos the resources to self-regulate. So I want to give you a few examples here of activating the vagus nerve, and then I'll show another scan example of what we do in the office to activate the vagus nerve. So I have a few things on a list here that have to do with vagus nerve activation. And one of the keys with this is the longer your kiddo's been in stress mode, odds are the more help they're going to need of hitting the brake pedal, hitting the brake pedal, hitting the brake pedal. When we see kids in our office, we often see them very frequent, a few times a week, because we need to go brake pedal, brake pedal, brake pedal, brake pedal when their nervous system has been stuck in gas pedal mode for so long. So if you need strategies of helping your kiddo maybe on the way to school, or maybe you're a teacher and you need some things to calm your classroom down, if you need activities at the end of the day to help your kiddo decompress and unwind before they do homework, these are going to tend to fall in the vagus nerve activation category. So one of the things has to do with breathing. Anytime we breathe out longer than we breathe in, that helps activate the brake pedal. In the Overcoming Anxiety webinar I just did, I described one of the breaths in there. I'll describe one that you can do as well here that I learned from podcaster Andrew Huberman, and it's called the physiological sigh. So if you've ever noticed yourself or your kiddo like, when are you tending to do that sigh? It's probably when you're feeling stressed. So it's your body knows it's its natural way trying to activate the brake pedal. So one of the ways that you can do this is by taking 2 inhales and 1 long exhale. So you go and you want to do a nice audible exhale. And make that exhale as long as you can. When you exhale longer than you inhale, it helps calm your nervous system. So inhale, a little sip of another inhale, and a big sigh to let it out. That's a good thing to do on the car if you bring your kid to school in the morning, or you do a couple of those before you send them out to the bus stop. Another thing for activating the vagus nerve has to do with any time we're activating the throat box, because vagus nerve has a lot of innervation and nerve sensation to our vocal cords in our throat. So singing, humming, maybe you have a little song you can sing with your kiddo on the way to school, or have them hum, or take a break in the classroom and have them do the same. Gargling water activates the vagus nerve. From a movement standpoint, if your kiddo needs more vestibular input, they might like to actually spin, or you might find that when they get up and move around, or you see them in their seat rocking, that's good vestibular input. That can be very calming for the vagus nerve. If you picture being in your mom's arms or your grandmother's arms, or you see the picture of the grandma in a rocking chair rocking a baby, why is that very calming? One, because they're probably giving them a little squeeze, getting some proprioception, and the rocking back and forth for a lot of kiddos can be calming for their vagus nerve if their vestibular system is craving that input. And then lastly, from a touch standpoint, skin-to-skin contact, if they can handle it, can also be calming. So that's why A lot of times we might do things in a certain order. If your kiddo has a tactile sensitivity, a touch sensitivity, and they don't like tags, or you put your hand on their shoulder and they shy away, they're not ready for it yet. But once that's integrated, now that touch can be very calming for their brain. So skin to skin contact actually helps get them out of the lower fear center of their brain and activate this frontal part of the brain called the prefrontal cortex. So that's one of the reasons skin to skin can be so important in infancy. Even with my son, he's 4 years old right now. When we're reading books at night, a lot of times I've given a little squeeze on his arms or his legs, trying to get some skin to skin. That gentle squeeze stimulates proprioception into his brain as well. One thing you can do in a environment where you're not squeezing your kiddo's arms and hands is help having them actually massage their ears. So this could be good for a group of kids, or again, maybe on the way to school, on the way home from school, is you can massage the top of the ear, top to bottom. You can go on the inside of the ear and then go right this little piece of cartilage here, massaging that too. The vagus nerve has a lot of sensory input from especially the middle of the ear. But when you do that, you're stimulating this calming sensory input from the vagus nerve into the brain. So doing those things on a regular basis can start to get more vagal nerve input into the brain to start to activate that brake pedal and teach the brain how to put their foot on the brake. I'll share one more example here before we wrap up for today, but also how to help the brake pedal has to do, again, with the neurological focused chiropractic that we do in our office. And what I often find is that if you feel like you can do some of these strategies and you kind of know what works for your kiddo, and you say, yeah, once in a while things pop up and we take a couple good breaths, we put on the weighted blanket for a few minutes, we do a little massage and they calm down and then they're good to go for a couple weeks. Odds are that they're just a little overwhelmed and you have the tools in your tool belt to handle them. However, if you're watching this webinar, odds are you might have tried a lot of tools. You might be doing some helpful stimulation, vagal nerve stimulation techniques around the clock, and you feel like your kiddo's still dysregulated, still overwhelmed, still not handling life well. Or you find like, yep, we got to do that right when he gets up in the morning. We make sure to do some wiggles. We make sure we feed him the perfect breakfast and get his protein in him. And we make sure that he gets to choose the clothes he's worn in the last 3 months because he doesn't want to try a new shirt. And we make sure we give him some lavender essential oil. And we've got this morning routine just laid out perfect. And as long as we follow all 10 steps, we get him out the door with not too much trouble, not too many meltdowns. And he does okay at school. And probably because he's so overwhelmed by school, we do a lot of those things at home, but he still is melting down at home. That's where we want to be able to help you. Because in that case, odds are there's something going on internally that's preventing him from succeeding and causing you to have to work so hard to hold things together. So there might be some stress going into the body into the brain from the body, or there might be the vagus nerve being off internally as well. So in this 7-year-old's case, he came to see us because of an ADHD diagnosis. In the beginning of the school year, he was diagnosed with extreme ADHD. Mom and dad said he'd sit still no longer than 20 seconds. They'd have this form that they would fill out each day to kind of help a kid stay on track. Like, did you put your things in your cubby? Did you stand in line? Did you complete this? And they were supposed to check things off to help them know they were doing organized things during the day. And most days he had like one box checked off. Mom and dad said he also had a lot of ear infections. He had sleep apnea, he had some tonsil issues, really a lot of colds, lung issues, and he didn't fall asleep well at night. So those are all giving us signs. I know I mentioned earlier, if the immune system's off, if digestion's off, if your kiddo doesn't fall asleep at night, those are all signs that his nervous system or her nervous system is shifted. Brake pedal, healing mode is down, and gas pedal is too active. And if we start to checkbox a lot of those things, it's a good sign that there's this imbalance in their nervous system. Too much fight flight, too much gas pedal, not enough brake pedal. So we did our assessment in his case, and we found that there was this big twist in his upper neck. This twist here is going to not only send stress into the brain, as we talked about with that other girl, but it's going to prevent his vagus nerve from working properly. Just like your car, if the brake line's clipped, you can put your foot on the brake all you want, but your car's going to keep going. So our focus in his case was to start adjusting him and get his vagus nerve on track naturally instead of needing to rely on all the perfect stimulation techniques to keep it going. So as we started adjusting him, this scan is, again, 2 months later, but right away, mom and dad noticed better sleep, falling asleep easier at night, one of the most common things that parents report. He was pooping better, he was breathing better. As he was getting into fall and the back to school time when normally he'd be sick a bunch, his immune system was way stronger. He was handling it better. They reported, and I'm kind of scanning my notes here on the back so I remember to tell you all the highlights, but they said in school he's more alert, more able to focus. Those forms that he checked off like one thing, all of a sudden he was filling the whole thing out each day because his brain could stay on task long enough to make it happen. And then a couple months into the school year, they retested him, and he went from extreme ADHD to barely qualifying as ADHD. And this wasn't because we gave him a new medication. We don't do medications in our office. It wasn't because we diagnosed him with a different kind of ADHD that he was just misdiagnosed with before. It's because we took a step back and said, what's happening with this boy's nervous system? If it's under constant stress, what if we can allow his nervous system to start to hit the brake pedal and be able to self-regulate and heal on its own? So that's where we get excited to share with you as parents is another resource that might have been missing. If you've done a lot of OT or therapies, if you're doing your mental health therapy, and if you're doing that morning routine that I talked about, and maybe you're considering, oh, should I put him on a med? Or he's been on a med, but it's still not helping that well. All these things are clues that there's something internally going on that is preventing your kiddo from succeeding. Some other clues you might be looking at is maybe way back there was a stressful pregnancy or a stressful labor and delivery, or your kiddo was colicky and refluxy and fussy as an infant. Those are signs that the nervous system was under stress mode early on. Maybe they had a lot of ear infections, or immune system was off. They had tonsil adenoid issues. They got sick a lot. Maybe you notice some milestones being missed where they only turned their head one way, or they crawled but kind of funky, or they skipped crawling and they started walking. Maybe they had some big falls or tumbles or injuries early on. Maybe they started going to school and you notice like this freeze mode happening, this overwhelm happening as soon as they went into a new environment. Those are all signs that something was off from your kiddo's nervous system earlier on. And if it was off early on and started to stay stuck in that stress mode, over time, gas pedal starts to win. More and more gas pedal, less and less brake pedal causes their brain to stay in fight-flight mode and not ever get into healing mode. So whether your kiddo has a sensory issue, an ADHD issue, we often see this common pattern going back to earlier stresses. And of course, we confirm that by doing our scans to see, yes, is there a stress stuck on in the body or not? Is there something else that they need to help? So if this resonates with you, if you have a kiddo that's struggling at home, I think you deserve an opportunity to get them checked out. So if you're in the Twin Cities, we'd love an opportunity to take a look and see what we can do to help. If you're outside, if you're watching this from Calgary or San Juan or somewhere else in the world, and you're wondering who's in my area, reach out. Let me know. I have a good network of other neurologically based chiropractors that also specialize in pediatrics and have an expertise in helping a kiddo's nervous system get healthier. I know since I've been practicing in 2007, that's been one of my passions, is to learn about the nervous system, learn about brain development in kiddos, and what we can do to optimize it and get them on track if they are struggling, or if they're doing okay, just to keep them on track. So what we do in our office is, if you're interested in that assessment, the first visit we do the scans, we do a history, a consultation, we take all the information of some of what's gone on in the past, rather than just jumping to tell me what's going on in the current day, what do you notice, and try to give a solution around that. We want to back things up and say, all right, what might have stressed your kiddo in the past that's leading to where they're at today? and we put our detective hat on to say, I bet you some of these things are actually why your kiddo's at where they're at in today's day and age. And if we know why they're there, if we see some stresses stuck on inside their body, then guess what? We know we can help. And we can unwind those stresses, start to put calm input into the brain, start to activate the brake pedal, and we start to see really amazing changes without having to treat their diagnosis. So if that interests you, we gather all our information on day one. We take time to study the scans and put it all together. And then when you come back for your kiddo's second visit, and then we tell you what we found. If we find something we can help with, we lay out what it takes, we lay out how much it costs. You have all the information you need to decide, does this resonate with me? Does this resonate with my mama gut, my daddy gut? Does it sound good? Does it make sense? Does it feel like the missing piece? And you can make a decision to move forward and start your kiddo with care. Or if you say like, no, it doesn't sound good, or yeah, I feel like there's something else going on, maybe we'll find not much on their scans, then you can know that I need a different resource, and we'll help you with that as well. So we welcome you into our office. We'd love to care for you, see what's going on, and give you some peace and in a sense of relief knowing that there could be an answer to help my kiddo. So please reach out, give us a call, shoot us an email, shoot us a message. We are here for you, and we'll take good care of you. See you soon.